Greetings. It is December the 13th, known traditionally as St. Lucy's Night. I will bore everyone for a moment by reading from John Dunn. "'Tis the year's midnight, and it is the day's Lucy's, who scarce 7 hours herself unmasks. The sun is spent, and now his flasks send forth light squibs, no constant rays. The world's whole sap is sunk, the general balm thy dropic earth hath drunk. Whither as to bed's feet life is shrunk, dead and interred, yet all these seem to laugh, compared with me who am their epitaph." Are you familiar with, now, Sam Dixon, what was John Dunn's denomination?
Roman Catholic, wasn't he?
No. He was a Cromwellian Presbyterian.
Wow. I knew Milton. Well, wait a minute. Presbyterians don't like to be called Cromwellian.
They shouldn't, but of course they were.
No, they were not. The Presbyterians voted against the execution of the king.
But
Cromwell expelled
Cromwell himself, what?
Cromwell expelled the Presbyterians from the Parliament, the Long Parliament. He had to get rid of them in order to execute the king. It's remarkable. It shows how strong the attachment of the British people was to the monarchy, because Charles Stuart, I know that he's a great hero to a lot of right-wingers. I went through that period, but really he was a catastrophic figure, and he certainly deserved to be hated, and really brought his death onto himself.
What would you call Cromwell then? If he wasn't a Presbyterian, he was a Puritan?
A Puritan.
So is there no modern descendant of that? I always...
The Congregationalists. They're guilty of this. They're guilty of the sin of independency. My parents knew all of this stuff. The Congregationalists were guilty of the sin of independency. They did not have a real church. They were just independent parishes like the Baptists. Baptists were guilty of independency too. There actually is quite a strong psychological difference between Presbyterians and Cromwellians. The Presbyterians always had an attachment to the monarchy, like the Episcopalians did. I like to tease Roman Catholics when Queen Elizabeth was alive. She was a much more sympathetic figure than Charles, but I would point out that she was a much greater figure, spiritual figure than their Pope, because she could change the number of sacraments as she moved back and forth across the boundary between Scotland and England. When she was in England, she could head a church that said there were 7 sacraments, and then she could take her train to Balmoral, and all of a sudden there were only 2. She could head that church too. So it's just a miracle. Their Pope can't do that.
Definitely can't, but that's really interesting, because I guess I've always labored under the illusion that Cromwell was in fact a Presbyterian and a Calvinist.
No, he was a Calvinist, but he was very much hostile to the Presbyterians, and they were an obstacle. The amazing thing is the Presbyterians, after all the trouble they had with Charles, voted against executing him. I don't think Charles left Cromwell any choice. I think had Charles been more adroit politically, he would never have been beheaded, but he wouldn't give anybody any choice but to behead him.
He was not a political genius, but we've got to talk about problems related to exactly this today on St. Lucy's Night, because earlier today you chastised me, and I want you to repeat your chastisement for the audience of what the problem with my presentation on the Virgin of Guadalupe was.
My remarks were that I think any discussion of religion is problematical. We need to have white Christian Europeans, Christian lowercase Christians, as well as higher case Christians, working together, and religion only divides our race. Our race specializes in family feuds. So it's a sublimation of racism, but they only consider victories over other white people significant. You don't see monuments in England to the victories over the Zulus or the Sikhs and things like that. You see them over the Germans and sometimes the French, But white people love to fight with each other. It's a luxury they could afford 300 or 400 years ago. We can't afford it now. We've got to get along. And in America, it's even worse than in Europe because we have such a Macedonian salad, if I might use that term, of religions. And in America, we have so many vociferous little groups of Presbyterians and Methodists and Anglicans and Roman Catholics and Nazarenes and Church of God and Seventh-day Adventists and Mormons and Quakers, and on and on and on, hundreds of these little sectarian groups. I guess it's wrong to include the Church of Rome because they're a big church, but anyway, there are just too many ways to offend white people, and they love these religious laws. My parents just lived off of them. I was marinated in all of these condemnations of rival sects of Christianity.
Well, I mean, I certainly understand what you're saying, but Sam Dixon, you are the one who proposed that small c Christianity traced back to 1492. And the reason it traces back to 1492, the reason that is such a brilliant suggestion, which never occurred to me, but I love it, is because 1492 is the year when basically Europe broke out. It broke out of the white race homeland, and in coming to the New World and in going to Africa and in going to India, the whole world is transformed by 1492, and the age of exploration begins, and that is the age in which miscegenation is born. It basically had never been, I mean, I'm sure there was plenty of miscegenation going on in the border of Roman Egypt with Nubia, all 2,000 people who were there. But it just wasn't that much of a threat to Europe proper. And basically, the point about the Virgin of Guadalupe is that she embodies this feature of modern Christianity, which basically has all but driven me out of my own church. When I was a child, I thought as a child. And the specific thing I thought as a child was that family, race, and religion were all one, or family, race, and church, I should say, were all one single religion. That we owed respect and duty to our family, to others of our kind, and to our church. And basically, Guadalupe, in 1531, was the first major break in that coherence. Obviously, it survived in some quarters. They survived down to my childhood in some quarters, but the Roman Catholic Church embraced the possibility that race, in terms of skin color, was meaningless. And you and I, for whatever reason, of our perverted, repressed upbringings in the Old South, we believe something different. We believe that we need to be comfortable in our skin. We believe that we need to be proud of our outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. And and basically this is the big problem. You're talking about a coalition of white people across denominational lines. Aside from, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Joe Biden, what are the biggest obstacles to white pride in the modern world? It's really our churches. Our Christian churches tell us now that you and I are terrible sinners. I mean, I've had this discussion with my own Reverend Thayer that racism is a sin.
Well, it's the only sin. It's like the only crime. It and anti-Semitism, those are the only two crimes. And all that Ten Commandments stuff, that's all gone. That it doesn't matter. The church is now dedicated to theft. They think it's perfectly all right for the poor to steal from the rich. They blaspheme. They take the name of God in vain. They re-image God. That's a big thing. I don't know about you and you Methodist, you Episcopalians, but in the Presbyterian Church, there's a huge movement of women liberationists who want to re-image God as a woman, maybe a black woman. I don't know. I try to avoid those people. But
or,
yeah,
or
yes.
possibly God herself. There are people who say God herself. God herself hates racism.
Mm-hmm. And they almost every sermon you hear is about race. I rarely go to church. I get so angry when I go to church. I'm better off not going. And
Me too. And I mean, it tears me apart. It really does. It tears me apart because it was such a huge part of my identity. And I mean, Trinity Church seems like, and all the churches in New Orleans seem like such perfect places because they basically are properly understood monuments to the Confederate States of America.
well, they also Episcopalians also always have beautiful sanctuaries. My father spoke with irritation of that you never see an ugly Episcopal church. And you do see.
Because God's house should be beautiful, because we have this philosophy that I just mentioned about race, that we believe in the outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Would you want God's house to be a mud hut? No. God's house should be beautiful, and God's people are beautiful.
Well, that's the message of Bishop Laud, but not everybody follows that. I agree with. I actually think, our parish when I was a child looked very English. It was a beautiful, it still is a beautiful Gothic English-looking church, but a lot of them aren't. Especially Baptist churches are often very unattractive. But you're now sounding like Aristotle. Aristotle, has made the famous remark that beautiful souls are incarnate in beautiful bodies, and it's a commonplace that the Greeks believed beautiful, therefore good, whereas the Christians believe good, therefore beautiful.
Well, I mean, whichever way it goes, there's a correlation. There's clearly a correlation. I mean, I believe that the Episcopal Church would claim to be Aristotelian. I think that would be a reasonable
I don't think they
inference.
would buy that idea. I don't think most Christians can buy that.
What?
I think as a matter of secular wisdom, it is true. In high school, the beautiful women were stuck up and often unpleasant. But throughout life, I have learned that you have to be very careful around very remarkably unattractive people. There are some of them who are very nice, but there's a tendency for them to want to get even with the world because they're unattractive.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a little bit a side point. The basic question of if the church is the if the Christian churches are uniform in anything right now, it's in hating racism.
I doubt that. Do you think the Orthodox are into that? They seem to be healthier than any other branch of Christianity. Certainly, the Russian Orthodox Church is very much remarkable. It stands now uniquely devoted to its own people. I've made the statement before, and people are bored hearing it, but I tell the Presbyterians that we belong to the Church of Anti-Scotland, and the Episcopalians belong to the Church of Anti-England, which is really true because the clergy in both denominations absolutely hate and despise the people that are sitting in the pews and want to bully them and repudiate them and destroy their sense of nationhood. Whereas the Russian Orthodox Church very much takes the side of its own people. They've canonized national military figures like Dmitry Donskoy and Alexander Nevsky. They're saints in the Russian Orthodox Church.
Well, I mean, there are lots of saints who are militants, and the whole concept of the church militant was formerly a very important part of Christianity. I mean, the famous speech on in Henry V, Saint Crispin's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Saint Crispin was?
No.
Saint Crispin, Crispin Crispianus. It was a perfect name for a battle, because he was a Christian warrior against the Moors in what's now Yugoslavia.
Wow.
He was a true defender of the faith.
Well, he must have been canonized very quickly, because the Muslims didn't overrun the Balkans until like the 1300s, and the 100 Years' War, when that speech was made, was in the 1400s. So they've canonized him fast.
I'm not at all sure that the actual Henry V ever made that speech. I think that was more in Shakespeare's mind, just like Mark Antony's oration over the body of Caesar. That has no real basis in classical texts either. But yeah, I mean, I think that as a matter of fact, I believe I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I believe that Saint Crispin was probably around the end of the Byzantine period. Probably, I'm thinking around 1415, but I'd have to check that.
Well, it moved fast to get him canonizing. You have people in England aware of him in Shakespeare's time, when the play was written. I like the line in that we're really just playing games. The audience is not interested in all this rumination about these obscure poets and old dead European males that at one time were famous, like Shakespeare. But I've always liked the line in that speech that those who fight with me today, gentle their condition, they become nobles. Which is what's meant, that they're becoming nobility by fighting for the king, and for England. And we have to think that of our own people. After the revolution, we will have to see that power, private power as well as public power, rests in the hands of people who gentle their condition by taking conspicuous parts in the struggle to liberate our people and lead them to triumph.
There we get back to the question, though. You have said that this podcast needs to be more practical, less academic and more practical. And I think that we've now come on one of the biggest practical problems. How are we ever going to get white people, white Americans, white Europeans, to actually go against their political, social, economic milieu and advantages to restore anything resembling European civilization and a white Christian world?
Well, I think in most things, our enemies are our greatest friends. And they don't distinguish between an Irishman and an Englishman, or a German or a Frenchman. They hate us all. They hate all white people. And they're forcing a sense of white consciousness, which people desperately need to replace what was lost at the time of the Reformation. Before the Reformation, I think there was a concept of sort of Christendom, which carried an unstated idea of race, and that it was Erasmus was a proud Fleming, but he also spoke Latin and wrote in Latin, and he felt himself part of a larger European community, and that's what we have to have. We have to get past these family quarrels, and we have to develop a sense that we are one people. Individual nationality will still be, ethnicity will still be important, no one in any sense wants Estonians to be become just interchangeable with other people and shop together in the Kmart. Nobody wants that, but
Except the owners of Kmart.
yes, they want us reduced to agents of production and consumption. Capitalism and Marxism have a lot in common. They degrade people, they degrade ethnicity, they homogenize people.
And so, I mean, it's this is where we have this big problem, I think, because you want Europeans to have a sense of unity and a sense of wholeness. You want them to have a philosophy which is about the whole. Is that correct?
Yes, you want the particular. You know, the Irish have a right to be Irish, the Scots have a right to be Scottish, but we have to look beyond these family feuds and realize that, as I said before, that we are fortunate that there's an overlap between what is acceptable racially and what is cultural and religious also. And we as your mention of the 1492 thing, my point in that is that in defining who can be a citizen of our new ethno-states, the test that I propose is that somebody whose ancestors, all or almost all of their ancestors, were Nicene Creed Christians as of 1492 will be acceptable. And most people weren't reared in the kind of religious fanaticism that possessed my family. But the Nicene Creed is the creed, as you will know, that's shared by all the 5 major branches of Christianity. And everybody in Europe in 1492 had the Nicene Creed. And so, but the converts that were coming up in Mexico, their ancestors were not Nicene Creed Christians as of 1492. But basically, our culture in all these countries, all the way from Russia all the way to Ireland and around the world through America, from New York to San Francisco, is Christianity filtered through a bedrock of the paganism in Greece and Rome of antiquity. And a Russian boy in his high school in Vladivostok who sees a picture of the Parthenon reacts to that in many ways the same as an Irish or English boy or an American boy in his high school on the other side of the globe. And so we have to
I'm not so sure about most American boys these days.
Oh, well, now, I mean, it's so bad. And that's another, I don't like to dwell on the negative. We have to keep our chins up and our morale up. But, you know, the most important thing, I used to think the most important thing was the ability to see things as they really are and not as we're told by the authority figures. I said that at the first American Renaissance conference, that the thing that separated people in the room from the so-called normal people outside, who I call the living dead, is that we see things as they are and not as teacher or the priest or the newspaper editor or the college sociology professor tell us they are. But I think now that's only half of it. The other and even more necessary thing is that there is a sense of belonging to a team, of being in a community. And Americans now don't have any of that. Modern people are all individuals. They have, I don't think young whites by and large have any concept of, you know, the things that tie us together. They certainly don't understand language, you know, the Indo-European language. They're not aware of the Aryans or the Indo-Europeans, and I don't think that there's any sense of community. They're just a collection of individuals, which is why we can't win in political struggles, because you've got teams of Blacks and Mexicans and Jews who are playing on a team, and then you have 170 million European individuals, and a team will always beat individuals. So that's a real grim thing. Can you give somebody a sense of community if he doesn't grow up with it? Or is it like children? If a child is locked in a closet from age 1 to 4 or 5, which is when we get our vocabulary, he will never be able to speak or understand the language properly. You can't give that to him later in life. The frightening question to me is, can you give a 25-year-old white guy a sense of community if he did not get it when he was a little child, as you and I did?
Well, I mean, this we goes back to, I think, the concept of religion. You can create a sense of community through conversion. And that is, in fact, how Christianity spread in the early part of the, you know, past 2,000 years. It before it spread by conquest and edict, it spread by conversion and by basically persuasion and argument. And you know, the rhetoric of what you're saying is so interesting because you're saying that white people need a sense of themselves as a whole community, a whole group. And can you tell me what about the whole translates into Greek as?
Almost.
Huh?
Tell you what the translation of whole is?
About something which is about the whole.
No, I know that their version of whole is almost, which sounds like it shares an Indo-European root with us. But what is
Kata,
it?
kataholos, which we pronounce as Catholic.
Huh.
When they talk about in the Nicene Creed, when you talk about one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, you're basically talking about that agreement that's embodied in the Nicene Creed, kataholos. It's derived from and entirely concerning the whole of the faith. The Nicene Creed doesn't say anything about blood or soil or people or skin. And I guess that's part of the reason why the Virgin of Guadalupe was so easy to make into the patron saint of Mexico. And I mean, one interesting thing you're talking about is Mexicans, at least a lot of Mexicans, Mexico has tried much harder than we have to develop a coherent iconography and ideology. And the Virgin of Guadalupe, I was saying last night, is right up there with the Mexican flag, the Aztec symbol of the eagle with the serpent in its mouth, seated on top of the nopal cactus. These are icons that Mexicans can relate to and understand that it is a unique race that came into being as a result of the conquest. They refer to it as the race of Tlatelolco, which was the final battle of the conquest. And 10 years after Tlatelolco was the Virgin Mary. We have nothing approaching a coherent mythology to convert anyone to. And I think that is really what I'm really struggling with in my own life and in the life of the city of New Orleans. I mean, 40 or 50 years ago, Black people were proud of the Confederate monuments here. Can you imagine that? They actually enjoyed.
It's really again, our enemies are doing our work for us. I mean, the greatest enemies of the Black race, I think, in our country are the leftist and the news media and the Black leadership, with the exception of the Black Muslims. They've invited the whole Black race to a pity party, and a pity party is not a party one needs to sign up for. Southerners sometimes invite themselves to pity parties, to feel sorry over how mean the Yankees were and all this stuff. And this is terrible to get into that. And I hear Black people today say things that I think, oh, the cleverest leaders of the Klan in olden times could only have dreamed of this. I hear Black college students and leaders and young people saying that they've been devastated and they can't do their algebra because they were forced to walk past a Confederate statue on their way to high school. This is, I mean, it's just fantastic. Stacey Abrams, the radical Black leader in Georgia that almost got elected governor, she talks about how Blacks are so stupid and inferior that they can't get picture ID to vote. That is what she's saying, that, while this discriminates against Black people. Black people are too stupid to get ID. Pretty simple act to get a piece of ID. You have to have one to get your food stamps. You have to have one to get the welfare. But Stacey believes that her race are so retarded that they can't get ID. So they're just ruining the Black race. The Black race is actually, in many ways, collapsing faster than the white race.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. The one thing that I've definitely observed is that in the from what I understand, anyhow, I was not born young and long enough ago to remember the 1950s, but in the 1950s and even the 1960s, basically Black families still existed. Mm-hmm. And now they basically, for the most part, don't. White
families no longer exist. As is often pointed out, the Black illegitimacy rate when the school desegregation decision, Brown versus Topeka Board, was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1954, the Black illegitimacy rate was only about 24%. 3/4 of all Blacks were growing up in intact Black families, and white illegitimacy rate was almost non-existent. Now, I think 75% of all Black children are illegitimate, and over half of all white children are illegitimate. It's which I don't mean to sound like a complete Puritan, sexually repressed person. I think it's a very bad thing for.
Well, it has almost nothing to do with sexual repression. It has to do with the
I know.
Formation of the.
That's what they would say. Oh, you're just being an old fuddy-duddy. But no, I think it's a terrible thing for children to grow up in a shattered family.
And it creates economic. I mean, the family was the social and economic bedrock of society and the political world as a whole, and that is what we've really lost. And the concept of family traditions, family roots, family identity. If you don't have that, if you don't have notion of your grandparents, your great grandparents, and your cousins, and your second cousins, and your third cousins, even, how are you ever going to have any significant feeling about race? I mean, race.
Today you could have that. But you're wondering if people who grow up without some kind of loyalty beyond their individual self, can they ever be part of a community? I find in my only line of legal work was trying to clean up real estate titles, quieting titles, and that entailed tracking down heirs to a great extent. You'd be amazed how often I would contact people whose grandmother owned a piece of property in Atlanta, and I was trying to find her grandchildren. I would meet people that did not know who their aunts and uncles were. That's about dips to the time. Well, we've reached you. We want to come to a settlement with you for your fractional interest, but we need to find out who your cousins are. And you'll say, well, who are your aunts and uncles? And they'll say, well, I really don't remember. I remember. Was it Mary came by one time? Uncle Bill. I don't know who they are.
Are these primarily Black people, or are these white people too?
No. There are lots of whites too, and I feel sorry for Germans because they've had such an unfortunate history in the 20th century, and they are our cousins in the heartland of Europe. And so, as just general policy, when I meet somebody who's a German or has a German name, I try to pat them on the back and say something nice about them. I remember this one. This is not a typical anecdote, but it is an astonishing one. When I was in the Army, I was on KP duty, and you've got your name on the uniform. Well, I looked up the line of soldiers coming down for me to scoop up their food, and there was one that had this impossible German name. It was actually a von, and it had a last name like Dirksenstetter or something, von Dirksenstetter. And so anyway, when he came up and told me what he wanted, I was dishing his plate up. I said, that is really a fantastic German name you have, really impressive. And this soldier looked at me and said, "Is my name German?" I'm not making that up. How could you go through life with the name of the von in it, and it never dawned on you that you have a German name? But he did that. Now, I mean, most people don't. They don't have any. The majority of people don't have any idea that their name is French or Irish or English or whatever. It's a level of lack of self-awareness and of knowledge of who you are that's fantastic.
So what we need is a rebirth. Bless you. What we need is a rebirth of some kind of cultural ideology. And that's really the only hope. And of course, this takes us back to Germany of the 1930s and what you're saying about Russia today, that in Russia today and Germany of the 1930s, there was this aspiration to merge religion and culture and national life. And that is this huge problem that we have. We basically need something analogous to the Virgin of Guadalupe to become a symbol of the rebirth of the white people.
Well, this is a subject beyond my ken. I can't give a religious solution.
Well, I
am a Christian. I was marinated in Christianity too long as a child to renounce Christianity. But the
Christianity has denounced you.
It starts way before the Virgin of Guadalupe. It starts with St. Paul or the Apostle Paul. The ex uno sanguine, one blood. There's no distinction between Greek and Jew. And St. Mark, go out and baptizing all nations of the world in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. For the very foundation of Christianity, there was this antagonism toward ethnicity and race that simply hardwired into the product. A lot of Christianity was born from Stoicism, I think. There are actually lines of what's said in the New Testament that are supposed to be from Stoic tracts. And a lot of people, and I like Stoicism. I read Epictetus frequently, who's my favorite philosopher. But a lot of people have this idea that these people are somehow right-wing and that therefore they would be racialist or whatever. They certainly believed in manning it up and taking charge of your life and not being an emotional wreck. But Stoicism was more than any other religion emphasized the unimportance of race and nationality. It didn't matter whether you were an Athenian or a Persian, that everybody was the same. And unfortunately, that's just really ingrained in Christianity, and it's simply wrong. I'm glad that one thing that in this particular deviant sect of Christianity that I grew up in, there was never any belief in the inerrancy of the Bible. That John Calvin didn't believe in that. And it was all inspiring and it was uplifting. It could be taken well, but it obviously has mistakes. And I just, to say that race doesn't matter is like saying to Galileo that the sun goes around the earth. It doesn't matter what the College of Cardinals say about the earth being, the sun go around the earth. The earth it isn't the center of the universe, regardless of what the Pope or the College of Cardinals says. And, reality is reality, regardless of religion.
Eppur se muove. Eppur se muove.
And then it moves? What?
uh, Galileo's famous retort at the
Oh, and yet it
Inquisition,
moves. Yeah,
and and you just said that you can't reject Christianity, but what do you do with the fact that Christianity has rejected you, me, Bill Johnson, Jared Taylor, everybody who met in Dallas, and all their fifth cousins too? You know, I'll get you and your little doggy too. I mean, that's basically the attitude towards us.
Well, I don't know. The leadership of all the major denominations, like I say, except the Orthodox churches, is now absolutely poisonously hateful and hostile toward our people. I mean,
Did you know Matthew Heimbach?
I met him, yeah.
Okay. You know he tried to join the Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah, and they reproved him for his racial views.
Yes.
But that's the American Orthodox Church. I don't. I think that's sort of a strange thing that the Russian. I know a lot. A considerable amount about Russian Orthodox, and I don't know quite as much about the attitudes of the Greek Orthodox or Bulgarian or Serbian or Romanian Orthodox. I don't know if their churches take their side the way the Russian Orthodox Church takes the side of the people of Russia, but certainly they can't be compared to the Roman Catholic Church now under Francis, or to the Archbishop of Canterbury, or the other people that run Western Christianity, who are just absolutely poisonous. I don't know why people even go to church anymore. I went to homecoming Sunday at the church where I was baptized some years back, and it was just so horrible that I cried out unconsciously. I was embarrassed. I cried out, "Why does anyone come here?" And my words reverberated through the sanctuary. But
oh my God, you actually did this?
Huh?
You actually did this?
I actually did this. I didn't intend it. It was just involuntary, but it was so horrible to listen to those people. And
what was going on? Tell me about it.
Well, they had this choir leader, and you can still look at people and sort of tell a lot about them, and you could tell that she hated males. There was just something about her glasses. I found that these chain glasses, the little chains, so that's a bad sign in a woman. And she had those. And so they announced that the children's choir was going to sing something. And these little, tow-headed little Anglo children all went down and gathered on the steps in front of the altar. And choir mistress announced that the children, this is homecoming. And of course it was. It was a thing that parish had every year, when people who had family connections to it over the centuries could come back there and feel this sense of community. She said, we have to remember that the whole world is our home, and everyone is in
Catholos.
Huh?
Catholos.
Well, and everyone is in our family. We'll see right there by changing the definition. No, everybody's not in your family. And liberals get this little buzz that when they say, I'm going to sneeze again, excuse me.
Bless you.
It's a genetic flaw. It comes down from my grandmother, according to my father. It's been in the family for generations, and I'm the only current one that suffers from it. I have these double sneezes several times a day, and it has nothing to do with having a cold or allergy or anything. It's just some sort of mental disturbance. But anyway, what was I saying?
You were talking about the world is the
world.
Whole world,
no,
the Catholos.
Liberals get a buzz from and I think Christians too now, from redefining words. We are family. I've got all my sisters with me. No, I'm sorry. My family was my mother and father and my two brothers. They were my immediate family, and my wider family were my grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. And when you dilute that by saying 5 or 6 billion two-legged mammals on the planet are members of the family, you've abolished family. But anyway, they do this, and so the whole world, she said, is our home. Everybody is a member of our family, and should the children they decided to sing a Ghana folk song. Well, I looked at these little 7 and 8-year-old children. I could just see one of them, well, Rodney, I see your hand is up. Yes, choir mistress, I have a resolution. Be it resolved that the children's choir of Rock Spring Parish decide that they will sing a Ghana folk song. And of course, like all this stuff, the kids had nothing to do. It was all elitist nonsense from this communist wearing a robe. And so anyway, that was part of it. And then they had a sermon by visiting clergyman from Ohio who basically just denounced the whole denomination. He started out pretty good. He said he was up in the pulpit and he said 96% of all Presbyterians have college degrees and 60% have postgraduate degrees. And I thought, well, this is good. This is going to be like when I was a child, they're going to explain that, well, this shows about working hard and doing your homework and painting the picket fence and taking the kids to Little League and changing the oil in the car, living below your means, that this will lead to a fruitful life. No, he went through these statistics and then he said, oh, Lord, forgive us. And then he went to this diatribe.
Forgive us?
He said that the bums lying in the street in their own vomit from their drugs and drinking in front of the union, the home for the shelter for the homeless, that they were morally superior to all these kids that went to Sunday school with me, who were sitting around me, who've grown up to be dentists and doctors and take care of their kids and put their kids through college. And I don't believe that. That's a side of Christianity that I think is just appalling, is the glorification of the lazy and the unfit. And but anyway, I looked at these kids that I grew up with, and I casually know who they are and where they are. And I thought, why are you here on the one day when you could sleep late to have this bully up there in the pulpit denounce you for making your way in life and being able to take care of your kids and put them in college? Why are you listening to this guy? So I just cried out, why does anyone come here?
And what was the reaction?
Well, everybody kind of jumped and looked on them, and they were sort of puzzled, and then they all went back to looking up at the clergyman. We used to be told in Sunday school that Roman Catholics were priest-ridden, and I very quickly realized that if Roman Catholics were any more priest-ridden than we were, the Roman Catholics were in deep, deep trouble. And they were all deferring to the clergyman. He was up there in the pulpit in the robe, and he was explaining to all of them how rotten they were for living below their means and saving for their retirement and taking care of their property and their kids. So I mean, this is in Marxism and liberalism is really a sort of a successor religion that with the theology and all that thrown out. I have a close relative who's a leftist, and I rarely argue with him, but I once pointed out to him that his scheme of morality is that the greater a failure you are in life, the more morally superior you are. That somebody who has achieved the status of an opiate addict and an alcoholic and bankruptcy and destitution and in jail, he's morally superior to the person who got a paper route, worked his way through college, got a scholarship to Johns Hopkins Medical School, and is now treating cancer patients at Mount Zion Hospital. And that's really how, don't you think that's how leftists and a lot of Christians view things?
I'm just at a loss. I mean, honestly, I think that you've created an interesting synthesis there. I mean, there's still a lot of support in the Episcopal Church, at least, for achievement, but there's this burden that's placed on. I mean, I noticed this. The Trinity has a school, a very fine school, associated with it in the Garden District, as do most of the Episcopal churches here, and the one at Trinity is basically, it acknowledges that if you go to Trinity School, basically you're already part of an elite, that you have a tremendous privilege for being there. But that your duty is to bring, basically your duty in life is to bring the less fortunate up, and specifically black, because to the degree that the heritage of Trinity as a great Southern institution, great Confederate memorial exists, it reminds us of our horrible guilt, and how we have to use this privilege that we have, to be generous, and sharing and uplifting uh, to those less fortunate. So, I mean, I don't really get the feeling that my church, at least, is advocating for failure. It's
I
it's
bet
it's
it is. I bet if you went there and listened to the sermons, there'd be a lot of that. The wickedness of people that actually had a purpose in life and made something of themselves and have a 5-bedroom house instead of a 3-bedroom house. This is just everywhere. And but I really think in these podcasts we should devote ourselves to practical subjects, and to the extent we can on this. You asked the question of what we can do to foster a sense of peoplehood, and I have some thoughts about that.
all right. Well, let's hear it, because my worry was that the that the basically the religion is so far against us that we have to deal with that problem first. But you've got something else.
Well, we can that somebody else will have to solve that problem. It's beyond my ability. But I think one thing that has really been lost, since we were children, that's critically important, is group singing. When you were a child, was there a lot of group singing?
A lot. I mean, singing was such a huge, music in general was such a huge part of my life. Uh, yeah, acting, singing, uh, the choir. I was a choir boy. I don't look much like one, but I was I was a choir boy at the Church of the Incarnation in Dallas, Texas, for a while.
Well, but there was group singing in the schools too. They had songbooks. Back then we even had religious songs in school, which you can't have anymore. But I think that's critically important, that there's something to being in a group, singing with every voice on one syllable and on a note of the music, to the extent you're able to do that, that builds a powerful sense of community. And all that is lost. This horrible modern music, including the stuff that the white nationalists listen to, the metal, what do they call it, heavy metal or something, and all these awful unmelodic things, and they don't know anything. I think dancing is very important. I think group dancing is very important, and
Did
that
you
that
did
existed also.
did you have a cotillion in Atlanta?
Yeah, we did, but I didn't go to it. My brother went to it. I wasn't qualified to go there. My brother went there because of my father. He was the oldest brother. But the I used to occasionally be asked to speak in public school, and not public and private schools. I usually as a freak. About every year or so, somebody would invite me in to show the kids in high school what a real freak was like. That doesn't happen anymore, because no one is allowed to say anything contrary to what they believe. But I would start this out by asking the kids in the class. I'd say, "How many of you, raise your hands? How many of you know a folk song from your country of origin in Europe?" No hands would go up. How many of you can dance a folk dance from your country of origin in Europe? No hands would go up. How many of you can sing an American folk song like Wildwood Flower? No hands would go up. How many of you can dance an American folk dance like the Virginia Reel? No hands would go up. And I would tell them, I'm not saying this to chide you. You're not to blame, but obviously your parents and that teacher over there have failed you. This is a very odd situation in which you've been this deracinated and cut off, and you from your roots, you can't sing any of these songs, you can't dance any of these dances. I did this in the hope of stirring up hatred and animosity between them and the faculty, which was very useful for us. But anyhow, I think that's very important that we restore community singing. I would like to see a movement songbook. And have you, we were talking on the last broadcast I was on about the field of Monterey, which has been completely lost, which was the most popular song in the Mexican-American War, and that's gone. Nobody knows these songs from the Civil War anymore. No one knows any songs from Europe. And they don't know any. They don't know anything from England or Scotland. I don't think there's one English or Scottish person out of 100 in America that would know things like Greensleeves or Hearts of Oak or Claver House, but I forgot the name of it. To the Lords of Convention, 'twas Claver House spoke, ere the king's crown go down, there are crowns to be broke. There was a time when people actually knew these songs, and it's all lost. So we should bring back this heritage of group singing and dancing.
Okay, that gets, I guess, to the subtitle of tonight's episode. How do we work within the existing structures? Because there is basically, there are certain existing cultural and social and cultural structures that we have. How do we, you're basically saying that we do something antithetical to the modern world.
We have
Because
to.
but how do we do it when we don't control those institutions? Do we try to work within them? Have you ever, for instance, tried to sponsor a songbook for a local high school, private or public?
No, but I did organize sing-alongs that we had for a few times in the American Renaissance, and some people took the songbooks back. I have a collection of songs that would be there. I haven't done very much for our cause at all. You asked if I've ever tried to do a songbook. I've been really very, very lazy about our movement. I spend most of my time trying to make money and enjoying myself. I really am a traitor to the revolution in that sense. At least in the spirit of critica y sama critica, I can criticize myself over that. But I don't think we can do anything within these institutions except oppose and corrupt and undermine them and build counter institutions. Which nowadays, one of the great things about the internet is you can get anything you want on the internet. It's just fantastic. If you want to hear the Russian national anthem, you just Google it and up it comes. If you want to hear Caro al Sol, have you ever heard Caro al Sol?
Well, actually, you introduced me to it. I confess I had never heard it before, but it's become one of my favorites.
Well, I will send you when we get off the air a wonderful rendition of the new Russian national anthem that replaced the Soviet one, and it's a picture of people in Russia singing it after the great victory of liberating Crimea, which had been torn from Russia. It's inhabited by Russians and was part of Russia for centuries, but was taken away from Russia in the 1950s by the communists and annexed to Ukraine, since they didn't really believe in ethnicity. And when Putin took it back in 2013 or 14, they had this rendition, and they had the new lyrics. You can get all that stuff on the internet, and you can organize your own stuff. Homeschooling is a lot of people who pull their kids out of the public schools. That's one thing you can do to build our own movement. And I think we also need a well thought out program of subversion of our society. And the proposal I have there, which I have sometimes implemented, is to subvert the leading kids of the next generation. That we should watch for. We should make a list of 100 of the leading prep schools in America. There's still a lot of WASPs in these prep schools, and they're giving fed the same lies and hate propaganda that they get in the public schools. what I've done before is I've had people get me mailing lists of the senior class for these prep schools, and I've mailed them movement material, usually the dispossessed majority, which unfortunately is no longer in print, with a cover letter urging them to read it and declare their independence of the hostile environment. And I think this had some minor effect, but I would like when I die for my estate to be used to fund a formal program of systematically subverting the leadership of the next generation, of getting them away from what they've been told by their priests and college sociology professors and high school teachers and the media and all of that. So that's something we should do. We should watch for things like lists in the local paper of the children who are in the National Honor Society, and then mail them attractive but very hard-hitting material on our issues. That's what the communists did. When you read about how the communists created the Cambridge spy ring in England, which I'm sure they did all over the world, they set out to subvert the two top universities of the British Empire, Oxford and Cambridge, because they understood, even though they were theoretical egalitarians, they were practical elitists, and they realized that the British Empire was run by the graduates of only two colleges, and if they could create the right kind of leftist atmosphere there, they could destroy Britain, and they did. That's where we got Philby and Anthony Blunt and Burgess and Maclean and the other communist spies.
I guess it just seems like that's, I mean, I like the idea of you're talking about creating an institution of subversion. And I guess, I mean, I just wonder how effective anything can be without a unifying new philosophy and something to get around. I mean, I'm thinking about your question about singing, and for various reasons, the schools that I went to, I do remember some music classes where there was group singing, but really the majority of the singing that took place was in and recitation was in the context of plays and musicals.
Hmm.
And you know, I grew up heavily on Gilbert, basically two or three very different strains of music. One was Gilbert and Sullivan, and the other was Richard Wagner. They don't have a lot in common, but they were contemporaries of each other in the 19th century. And Gilbert and Sullivan was, well, especially W.S. Gilbert more than Sir Arthur Sullivan, but they were basically Christian nationalists. They were socialists. Clearly, they wanted to tear down the aristocracy and the monarchy, but they did so by making fun of it, and they were very. W.S. Gilbert was a very strong. I mean, he's still fairly popular, but everybody recognizes that he was just a terrible racist by modern standards. And the thing is about the culture of Gilbert and Sullivan and Wagner is that you're basically recapitulating major themes in Western civilization through drama, at the same time maintaining high standards of discipline and skill through theatrical performance, and also, tacitly approving a value set without knocking people over the head with it. I mean, I suspect that National Honor students, even today, probably get tons and tons and tons of mail, email in particular, and how we would ever get any of them into to pay attention to even such a huge issue as the Great Replacement, for instance. Just talking about it would be a huge challenge. But if we could do things like put on plays, put on productions, and have all white casts. It is one of the bizarrest things, of course. I mean, I know you're aware of this, but every history drama, every Shakespearean drama has to portray a multicultural, multi-ethnic population, and this is simply absurd. I mean, there's exactly one genuine black part in all of Shakespeare, and that's Othello.
But he's not really black.
Well, he was a Moor.
Right.
He was
Moors were North Africans. They weren't sub-Saharan black people.
He was specifically referred to as black, though.
I know they referred to swarthy white people as blacks back then. He wasn't an African. But anyway, that's a minor point. I think we only have to get a small percentage of the leadership. If we get 2% of the graduating classes of the top 100 prep schools, we could have the makings of a revolution.
Well, that's the 2 or 3% rule has been widely celebrated, but how do we get there? I mean,
well, I need to die, and
why do you need to die? I mean,
my estate can fund this, so that my estate can fund all of this.
Why can't you do it while you're alive? I mean, your presence is inspirational to me. I'm sure it would be inspirational to millions of others if they knew about you.
Well, maybe, but I'm a living proof of what Winston Churchill said about Clement Attlee, a very humble man with much to be humble about. I can't claim to be any kind of great seer or leader, but really, I do think if we could just subvert a small percentage of the ruling class, and there's a certain number of kids who are rebellious, and they need to be given direction. And there's a friend of mine, an American, that got a scholarship to Winchester, I think it's called. It's like the second thing to Eton in Great Britain. And he told me that while Sir Oswald Mosley graduated from Winchester. And anyway, he said that he was there when the National Front was making the news in the 70s. And he said that they had a mock student election, and about 11% of these upper class kids voted for the National Front. And the headmaster just had a stroke and called them all into the assembly and denounced them all and said, we don't know who you are, but this is not funny, and we're going to put a stop to this. So anyway, roughly 1 in 8 of them were attracted to this party that was talking about shipping all the immigrants back to where they came from. And that somebody like that is in a position to really fund and lead a party. I don't come from that social class, and I don't come from that kind of money, and neither do you. But that's the element that historically has caused revolutions. Revolutions have not taken place by the ordinary people, that have nothing. They've been led by people like Cromwell and the others.
George Washington, a good example.
Yeah, he's a very multi-dimensional figure.
Well, I mean, he was one of the richest men in America, and people often forget that George Washington, Benjamin Franklin were tremendously wealthy people for their time. I mean, Washington went to the Continental Army and basically said, "Okay, you folks, I'm going to give you the seed of an army, and all I'm asking is that you keep on supporting me." But he paid to muster the original Continentals himself.
I did not know that.
That There was, well, did you think there was a revolutionary tax?
Well, they were stealing all the property from the Tories, and
Well, they were trying,
so I
but
thought they'd have enough money, enough volunteers to fund it. But the
no,
anyway, yeah,
George
he was.
Washington.
I think an interesting essay. We're wandering all over the place. It's not really getting anything accomplished, but just our own ruminations. But I've often thought an interesting compare and contrast essay could be done between Washington and Obama. Washington came from the elite of Virginia. He was a distant cousin of the king. He was the richest man in Virginia, and yet he also went out on his own as a surveyor through the West and alone surveying the Indians, the areas that the whites were settling in from the Indians. He risked his life in battle, in the colonial wars and in the Revolution. And he never tried to live off his ancestors. He didn't go around saying, well, I am special because my ancestors were lofty. But Obama was just the opposite. He came from this degraded background, the most despicable kind of people imaginable, this horrible woman, this hippie woman who gave birth to 2 or 3 children by different fathers, none of them white, who hooked up with claims to have been married. I'm dubious about that, to this Kenyan foreign exchange student who basically was just a sperm donor. Once he impregnated her and got little Barry Obama growing in her body, he absquatulated back to Africa, and Obama only saw him one time in his life. But of course, he glorified him and wrote a book about dreams of my father. It's just ludicrous. His white grandmother reared him because his mother was so unfit that she just decamped with some of the non-white and dumped her children on the grandmother. Obama never had any gratitude to his white grandmother. He never heard of her. He dined out on his degraded status the way Washington never tried to dine out on his aristocratic status. It's an interesting contrast.
It is, but talk about concepts that don't help us much, because Larry Summers, the former president of Harvard, uh, basically had his eye on Barack Obama to be president. They consciously selected this kid for some reason, and they groomed him and prepared him to be the first black president. That was that was an elite plan. So I mean, Larry Summers was, I think, what was he, the second Jewish president of Harvard. Uh, my diplomas at Harvard are signed by the last Christian president of Harvard, Derek Curtis Bach. And basically, I don't think there will ever be another Christian president of Harvard. And isn't that amazing if you think about it, that a school which in the 1920s was reluctant to admit Jews and has become dominated by Jews and controlled by a completely anti-American elite. But that anti-American elite is the elite that is planning our future, and they're doing it again with the full cooperation of the most venerable of American institutions. Harvard is the oldest corporation, the oldest trademark in the United States. The United States itself doesn't even come close to the antiquity of Harvard. And that trademark, that corporation, has been completely taken over and transformed into a very real conspiracy against us that
Well, I think I
condemns.
go back. That's because You had a team, a minority team working as a team against a collection of individuals. And once you have that, the result is predestined from that beginning, that the team will prevail. The WASP at Harvard had no real sense of ethnic solidarity. They despised ethnic solidarity. You're supposed to stand alone, be an American rugged individualism, American individual. And that is just nonsense. That is just poison. One of the greatest enemies we face is this love of individualism in America. That has got to go. You spoke of someone being a socialist. We have to be socialists in the sense that we have to put the group interest ahead of individual self-interest.
I was speaking of W.S. Gilbert, and it's interesting that in the birth of socialism, there was this tremendous tension between international socialism and National Socialism. George Bernard Shaw is widely regarded as one of the founders of English socialism, for instance, the Fabian movement, the London School of Economics. And yet, if you read George Bernard Shaw, and I mean, again, I feel like plays, performance, is a tremendous part of education that I see as being lost, even more than the loss of Morris folk dancing and things like that, because George Bernard Shaw's plays, like W.S. Gilbert's musicals, are all detailed philosophical and political discussions of basically alternative policies. Shaw, in particular, he was a nationalist, and oddly enough, he was one of these British people who frequently went over to Bayreuth in Germany to attend the Festspiel of Richard Wagner, especially during the pre-World War I years. And he hung out with people like Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who was a founder of racial ideology, often called a philosophical antecedent for National Socialism. But George Bernard Shaw himself, in the play St. Joan, for instance, he elevates her nationalism to a reason for existence. And that's really an interesting thing. And I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the tragedy of nationalism is that it is in some senses a precursor for globalism, because it does abolish and obliterate local variants.
I'm not worried about that.
Well, I mean, you say that you want people to remember their folk heritage, but a folk heritage, there's really no such thing as an English folk heritage. There are Cornish folk heritage. There are Welsh folk heritage. There are Devonian customs, Yorkshire customs, Lincolnshire customs, East Anglian customs, because every part of England was had a unique cultural heritage.
True,
Right?
these things can be sublimated into a sort of a national pattern, and people move around too much today. But I regard nationalism. The problem with nationalism is not that it's a precursor to globalism; it's the fact that it has been the destruction of our race. The two great Peloponnesian wars in the last century between the British and the Germans may have doomed our race to extinction. And these were fought in the name of nationalism. I really think nationalism, like individualism, needs to be repressed. There needs to be a sense of belonging to a larger community. And You look
How can
very
you?
depressed.
I am, because how do you do that without religion? I mean, this goes back to Guadalupe last night.
Well, religion is
The
gone, so
Mexicans basically have done this. The
the fact
Mexicans have done this.
the facts on the ground are that, except in Eastern Europe, religion is gone. Only under communism has religion flourished and is still strong. You know, you go to Hamburg and places like that, and go to Paris or London or Edinburgh, you know, Dublin, religion is just gone. These Christian preachers and priests who are now beating out the drums of this anti-race stuff, they really have no influence. The congregations are empty. This churches are empty, and no one's actually involved with them anymore. They're trotted out on television when they're needed to try to shame white people, but really, we're in a post-religious world.
Well, we may be in a post-Christian world. I would strongly disagree that we're in a post-religious world, because I think, based on my understanding of human culture and psychology, I mentioned in an email to you earlier to one of Sigmund Freud's titles that I really do like and relate to: Die Zukunft einer Illusion. The future
of a fantasy.
The future of fantasy. And the modern fantasy really is very close to the heart of our movement, and very close to the creation of white nationalism in particular. And the modern fantasy is the world against the Nazi devils. The world against the world of what a few people I've heard in the movement calling Holocaustianity.
Yeah. Or just on slaveholders. I mean, everything is blamed on white racism in America. The original sin, the white people.
Yeah, like I'm telling you about Trinity School.
Religion is not dead. Religion now exists as liberalism and egalitarianism. This stuff is really their religion. It's fact free, and facts don't matter to them. Somebody made a witticism that where one of us told a woke type that my facts don't care about your feelings. But I think the liberals and our enemies, the woke crowd, they would reply, our feelings don't care about your facts. And then it is a religious obsession with them. It's very difficult to make it amenable to reason and to facts and criticisms.
You think that history has ever been moved by facts?
Yeah, I think so. I think Galileo ultimately won, and the Roman Church, the College of Cardinals, lost, and the cost of that was colossal to the Church of Rome. I think that's why the churches have been empty of males in Italy and Spain and France, for centuries. I think people just had enough of obscurantist priests trying to control science.
Well, that's in relation to religion and science, but I guess what I'm asking about is, politically speaking, can you think of any major political movements that depended on facts rather than feelings? I mean, you yourself repeatedly comment, and I'm in total agreement with you when you do, that the Declaration of Independence is basically a series of fairly tawdry lies and libels against the King and Parliament of England. It was a paper envisioned and designed to stir up popular feeling against the existing regime in order to create a new one.
And to get public opinion in France among the Enlightenment type people, to get that public opinion behind French entry into the war. That was a major thing. It was just a whimsy document. But it created this terrible schizophrenia at the beginning of the country. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have long been recognized as being directly in conflict with each other. The only Roman Catholic delegate to the Constitutional Convention remarked that we have tried to draw a document based on human experience and not on theories. And the Declaration of Independence is all based on theory and not human experience. Which has been, you know which president publicly stated that, recognized that difference and stated that he stood wholeheartedly with the Declaration of Independence and not the Constitution.
I do not know who said that.
Well, Abraham Lincoln. On his way to take the oath of office, he made a speech in Independence Hall in Pennsylvania. He said, my heart has always been with the Declaration. And I think that the wild things he did, the Emancipation Proclamation, are examples of this kind of craziness. I mean,
That's really interesting because, of course, the Gettysburg Address refers only to the Declaration and in no sense to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. He had no use for the Constitution. I mean, philosophically, he was for basically a Jacobin form of government. Nobody, no sensible person would want slavery back, or the slavery was obviously something that had to be gotten rid of. There were some Southerners who were still attached to it, but many Southerners, like Lee, recognized it had to go, and it was in the interest of white people to get rid of it. But the way of doing it is, I don't really care much about constitutional arguments. I have a rather ruthless view that we're going to need someone like Ataturk or Dmitry Donskoy or Stalin to get us out of this mess. We're not going to get out of it by arguing constitutions and states' rights. But now where was I going with all of this?
Probably to say that there's really nothing. I keep getting this from you, that there's really nothing we can do on a practical level. We just have to wait for the winds of history to blow.
Well, they're coming our way. That's not a resignation. I mean, you do stuff. You put these podcasts together, and the little audience we have listens to them. That's something. You're lighting a candle. I try to light candles. I've written a few things. I've made some speeches. I've organized some organizations. I've given money to things. These is what we can do. I think that the grave danger to us is oscillating between complete despair and enthusiastic, fanatical dreams of unrealistic things like giant Nuremberg rallies with hundreds of thousands of guys walking around with carrying spades, singing the song of the work soldiers or something. That's either of those extremes is a failure. You have to brighten up the corner where you are. You have to start where you are to make a trip. You can't start 500 miles from home. You have to start from home, and we have to take cognizance. Any kind of proposal for movement activity, and I say this, I hope, to whatever young people listening to us, any proposal has to be evaluated based upon, is it feasible with existing movement resources and personnel? If it's not feasible with existing movement resources and personnel, then it's not a feasible proposal.
Well, as you said, what we can do is we can talk, and up to a point, given our own human limitations, we can think. And I am, I've said this over and over again, but I'll say it again. I have been going through, ever since they decided to take the Confederate monuments down, I've been going through this rift with the church here in New Orleans. They, about 10 years ago, before Charleston, but during Obama, they had a mass of racial reconciliation here at Christ Church Cathedral, and I wrote and published a letter to the Bishop of Louisiana protesting that and objecting to it wholeheartedly. And everything that I said was rejected. Everything that I argued just. I nearly got into a fist fight on the stairs of Christ Church Cathedral with the deacon. If it gives you any idea of what it was like, and he was, I mean, he's a member of the Society of Cincinnatus. He's a descendant of one of the founders, the founding fathers of the United States, as am I, and we are, the people who should be involved in preserving this racial heritage that we have, and instead he's the deacon of Christ Church Cathedral, and I'm some nut who gives podcasts to that the rector of Trinity says are blasphemous and sinful.
Well, but like I said, things are so much better now than they were in the past. People are very demoralized. Young white nationalists are demoralized by what's happened since Charlottesville and all that, and the censorship of the social media. Things are still so much better than they were in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s. They're incomparably better. The whites are much more radical. The system is failing. It's failing fast in so many little ways. You have to be in business, as I am, and travel around and deal with government and post offices and builders to really see what's happening. I had to go to a hearing at the Fulton County Courthouse on a tax appeal I had the other day. That in and of itself is a story of how chaotic government is. That I even had to go to this hearing. But it was important that I be there on time, and I got caught by the fellow that takes care of my yards and my properties, an elderly white guy. He rents one of my houses at a discounted rate in return for being available for this. He needed a check, and so I got delayed by about 10 minutes, and I was worried about being on time. Well, one of the problems going down Peachtree Street in Atlanta was that delivery trucks were routinely stopped, blocking the lanes next to the curb. So it would go from being a 3-lane street to being a 4-lane street, or 6-lane street to being a 4-lane street. Well, I mean, just look at this. You see this all the time. You see Amazon delivery trucks just blocking a major thoroughfare. This is not the way a well-run country operates.
I'm
clogging the streets up. You're clogging the streets up. You don't do that. And they'd say, oh, well, but we've got to deliver things because people don't go to stores. Well, no. If the price of getting the things delivered is that you're going to tie these streets up, then you need to reform society. It's just everywhere. People can't do their jobs. They're ignorant. It's just, I don't see how people fail to see it. I guess they don't know there used to be a better country. I don't think young people know that this kind of thing didn't used to happen. But I think I probably told you my experience with my health crisis this summer. The end of that was that I went to this hospital where I had an appointment for a test, and this very pleasant Black woman, she was not hostile, sullen, told me I did not have an appointment there. After much looking and talking with the other Black ladies who were admitting people, she said, I'm sorry, you don't have an appointment here. And I said, I know the doctor, I know the suite, I know I do. She said, no, Mr. Glasgow, you don't have an appointment here. Well,
Glasgow?
That's not my name. She had misread my driver's license. She had read my middle name, which I despise. And so she was looking to see if there was any record of my ever being in that hospital under the name of Mr. Glasgow. Now, this is an astonishing thing. What if I had been brought in on a gurney from having a stroke or a heart attack or automobile accident, and she loaded my name in wrong? They look at your driver's license when you get admitted, and the doctors had been unable to access any of my medical records, and I could be, in a coma, and they wouldn't know who I was. They wouldn't know what medications I was allergic to. This is just going on at every level in America. It's just, the country is just a laughing stock. It bears no relationship to the way things were 50 years ago. And so it's coming to an end, and these facts are arguing for us. Fat and happy people are not going to listen to us, but people who are frightened and in danger and losing things, they might, and they have. We have so many more people now that are aware of these issues. Back in the 60s, nobody was aware of this stuff. Eventually,
well, I mean, you say that, but the world was. I mean, the world I was aware of, anyhow, was run by white people, and there was no question about it.
But it was run by white people who already were flawed. They didn't have the right ideology. They didn't think. There were many things wrong. They had this theory that was presented as scientifically true, that environment mattered, heredity didn't matter, there were no racial differences. Well, we've won that battle. I mean, the verdict of science is in. Genetics is colossally more a force that influences human destiny than environment. As George Eliot said, breed is more important than pasture, and that's true. And these people, Heidi Bayrish, and you will know who Heidi was.
Oh yes.
Well, Heidi loves to say that the southern part of Austria that they have junk science at American Renaissance. Well, I doubt that Heidi has she does not have a degree in science. And no, Heidi, you just have completely lost in science. The only way you can keep this egalitarianism going is through your religion. It's your religion, Heidi. The facts are all against you. You're on the same level as the College of Cardinals trying to burn Galileo because he said that the earth went around the sun. That's the level of Heidi Bayrish and the SPLC. And eventually, this will change things. The fact that we have won at the academic scientific level will change things. The fact that Americans are being ground under will change things. These are all things that the fact that education is such a joke is actually beneficial to us. The more people leaving college and high school with empty minds, they can be filled with the truth. It's a lot harder to uneducate somebody. When someone's been taught a lie, it's much harder to change that than to start them out with the truth. So overall, I mean, I think things are just, you never would have had someone like Trump elected in the time of Eisenhower or Kennedy or Johnson or Jimmy Carter and all this sort of thing. So these are all indications that facts are arguing for us, events are arguing for us. The failure of the authority figures is arguing for us. It's across the board. The authority figures, the ludicrousness of these people in the media, the absurdity of people like Anderson Cooper and Mary Louise of CNN and Mary Louise Kelly of NPR. These people are just, they're such liars, and they're ludicrous. There is a certain percentage of people who think, and they're the ones that matter, and they can listen to Mary Louise Kelly and Anderson Cooper, and you know just how totally these people lack in any credibility. But when Tucker Carlson interviewed Orban of Hungary, the little mantra that people like Mary Louise Kelly and Anderson Cooper and all their twins all over the country was that this proves that that Tucker Carlson is not a journalist, a real journalist. No real journalist would ever interview Orban. In other words, every real journalist would just be little Sir Echo to what the system says. Well, I think 20 to 30% of the people can listen to that, and they can realize, no, Anderson, no, Mary Louise. What you're saying means that you are not real journalists.
Well, it's very strange. I hadn't heard that, but it's very strange to say that a real journalist would not interview the head of state of a prosperous state in Central Europe. I mean, that's bizarre.
The whole of America, a thoughtful person knows how ridiculous America is. It's a ridiculous country. What about Putin? Why do we not hear an interview? I like Putin. I support Russia. I'm also pro-Ukrainian. I'm against the war. I'm opposed to wars between brother peoples. but you never ever hear, not only you do not hear an interview with Putin, you don't hear an interview with anybody in Russia. I listen to All Things Considered on most days on National Republic Radio, and I hear Mary Louise Kelly, who does interviews, it's so obviously biased that it's transparent. They've never interviewed Putin. They interview constantly people in Ukraine, usually somebody who is designed to get the sob sisters' emotions in gear. More often than not, it's a mother with a little baby crying in the background, and they even play soap opera music in the background. You couldn't make it up. But in a real country with real adults, people would be demanding, we want to hear what the Russians have to say. We want to hear their side. But Americans are not real people. They're not grown-ups. They're children. Someday that we hope they will grow up, but they're not grown up now. But the media, at least, is just ludicrous. It's just utterly lacking in any credibility to any thoughtful person. So these are all good things.
The moderation, the moderation of the 50s and 60s is sort of, I think, what you're talking about is the origin of this problem, because there was some sort of prejudice against radicalism, I think. Am I right? That
Yes, you were.
basically Eisenhower and Kennedy and Nixon, they were middle of the road. And is that how people became so uncritical?
Well, I think that psychiatrists say that 70 to 80% of the people always believe the authority figures anyway. So I don't think people very, and I think also the American education system is designed to avoid ever engaging people in critical thinking. I only had one teacher in all of my career in academia, all the way through law school. I had exactly one teacher who encouraged critical thinking, and she was a senior year high school teacher named Eleanor Pruitt. And she would have us through the Great Society was legislation was going through. There were a lot of debates, not merely about the Civil Rights Bill, but about medical care for the aged and federal aid to education and things like that. And she would have us write essays on these subjects. And of course, she would always choose to argue the side you believed in. And she would grade them and discuss them in English composition. And then she would say, well, your project for next week is to write an essay arguing the opposite point of view. A teacher like that, they, of course, would be fired. They would immediately, if someone asked to write an opposite view about civil rights legislation. So Americans have been, the system has studiously avoided exposing American young people to critical thinking. But nevertheless, the system, the mandate of heaven, as the Chinese say, has run. The system has failed, and it's failing daily. The sight of America vetoing a resolution calling for peace in Gaza, vetoing it in the face of every nation on earth but 10 voting for it. It's America and Israel standing alone. It's America exposed for what America is and held up to the vilification and hatred of the whole world.
Well, that certainly isn't new. I mean, the United Nations has been a site where the United States has backed up Israel alone, as far as I know, my entire life.
Yes.
I can't think of any time period where that was not the case. We have always been a lone dissenting vote in favor of Israel. And it's very peculiar, but I get back to this question of motivation. How is there anything we can do without without money, without actual holding office, to create a new ideology, I used the phrase earlier today, an alternative religion. And I just wonder about that. Do we need to try to create something I mean, social Darwinism for a while became a kind of religion, and it was I was looking at some commentary on Germany, and it said that basically up to a point, the Germans in the 1930s were endorsing the philosophy of social Darwinism. And is there anything like that that we could possibly do in the face of the religion of equality and uh, Holocaustianity and that sort of thing? Do you
Well,
believe that?
I think we can return to our roots, and we can go back to the Europe of Erasmus, and the England of Sir Francis Drake, and the Russia of Dmitry Donskoy. We can return to our roots, and it's an old system of thought, old philosophy, and
How would you define that though? I mean, the England of Sir Francis Drake, uh, fight the Spanish, claim California, and then abandon it. Um,
Well, we don't have that anymore. Sir Francis Drake and his sailors fought for England, just like the Greeks at the Thermopylae fought for Sparta. But we live in a world in which that is scorned. President Biden made a very interesting talk on Veterans Day. I don't know if you heard it or read it, but he said the thing that made American veterans nowadays so special is that they don't fight for a country. They don't fight for a people. They fight for an idea. America is an idea, and they're dying for an idea. Well, that's a very interesting thing. First off, I can't live in an idea. I can live in a nation, but I can't live in an idea. Can you live in an idea? I don't think you can. And the other thing is, you look at treason, you look at the Philby spy ring, the Cambridge spies I was just talking about, or this one named Ames. There was one named Ames who was a spy in America several decades ago. And everyone talked about how horrible he was. He betrayed America to the Soviet Union. And he was a truly despicable and horrible person who should have died. He caused the deaths of the numerous of people behind the Iron Curtain. And he only served like 20 years in jail. He should have died. But the point is, if America is just an idea, this has many ramifications. And first off is a nation that is an idea must necessarily be an intolerant nation, because you have to have the idea. It has to be a totalitarian nation, a country. You don't have a real nation. You're not fighting for England the way Sir Francis Drake did. You have an idea. Well, if you have a different idea, where's the treason? Your idea is different from the idea that Biden says America is. So why should you condemn someone like Philby or Anthony Blunt or others who betrayed the United Kingdom? If Britain is just an idea, which I think they would say the same thing nowadays, then there's no reason to condemn the Philby spy ring. They simply had a different idea. They were therefore not Englishmen. People who have a different idea in America are not Americans. And the other thing is that a nation idea, you have to be intolerant. If someone doesn't have that idea, then they're not members of the community. You read the novels of Sir Walter Scott, every type of Scot is treated as a genuine Scot, and even almost lovingly by Sir Walter Scott in the novels, whether they are reactionary Roman Catholic holdouts like Mary Stuart, or fanatic Protestants like the characters in Old Mortality, or Episcopalians, Scottish Episcopalians, or whatever, or they're all Scots. They all are part of the nation, regardless of all this. But you can't be, if you have un-American ideas, you can't be an American. So you and I are not members. We're not citizens of this country. You and I are necessarily, we have abjured the realm We are free of American citizenship. So these things are
I thought seriously about renouncing citizenship when Obama was elected. I admit, I really wanted out of this country. It was.
We're stuck here. I'm too old to go anywhere else. But
It is. It's interesting though, because it does seem to me that we keep coming back to the concept of you can't live in an idea, but you have to have an idea of identity. And in a sense, I mean, you and I are living in if we're not real Americans, it's because we're living in a different ideological universe, right?
Well, we have a much stronger identity than most Americans. We have a happy life in a way. My life is, I think, lived much more intensely than people who believe in the tinsel show of America. My friends and your friends extend back over thousands of years. They go back to Plato and Socrates and Sophocles and Epictetus and Sir Francis Drake, things like that. These people's world consists of Princess Megan, whatever her name is, the Duchess of whatever Megan is supposed to be Duchess of, and Lady Gaga, and all of these ludicrous people. We are multidimensional. We have a real identity, and we can enjoy it. I enjoy being what I am. My life is much more fulfilling and full of meaning than the so-called normies. I would not want to be like them. I don't want to be one of the living dead.
It's amazing. I didn't actually meet you until a couple of years ago, but somehow we evolved along very, very similar ideological lines.
The facts changed us. I think to some extent people react to facts. The idea rises up among people, and the idea, I think, is rising among white people now that you can't be in this country with the other people who are in this country. We can't. Not only can we not live in the same country as all these racial groups that are coming for our throats, I don't think we can live in the same country with people like Heidi Birish or Mary Louise Kelly or Anderson Cooper. These people, we know what they are. These people would take all of us out in the Catine Woods and put a bullet in the back of our heads.
Oh, in a second.
They would kill us if they could. They have no respect for the law. Mary Louise Kelly and Anderson Cooper are lying every day, promoting themselves lying. They're supporting the violation of the law and the prosecution of these people about January 6th. Holding people in solitary confinement, denying them bail, all the stuff that is going on with them. They're deliberately airbrushing out of the news the crimes of the Antifa, all the attacks upon Trump rallies. I think there were over 300 violent attacks on Trump rallies in 2016. That's another milestone in the rush to put America off the canyon edge. Have we ever? Abraham Lincoln did a lot of that, but other than Lincoln, I don't know of any time in American history where you had violent attacks upon the political rallies of one of the major political parties.
Well, I guess you could say that
Mary Louise and Anderson. I'm not going to talk about that.
I guess you could say that in the late 19th century, the labor conflicts were pretty violent. Yeah. There were some major riots and.
But did we ever have a president run like Biden did, and in his last debate, solemnly assure the American people in response to a question from a journalist that under his administration, no Antifa would ever be prosecuted?
No, I think that's pretty interesting.
Well, he did. Go look at it.
No, I mean,
he had a reason for it too. He explained that the crimes of Antifa aren't committed by people; they're committed by philosophy.
Now that's interesting.
In a normal, healthy society, this statement would have disqualified him for election in the minds of tens of millions of voters. we have never had, even Abraham Lincoln, I don't think, went around saying that he was publicly, openly sanctioning the mob violence directed at the opponent.
Well, we have come to the end of our two-hour segment. Thank you, Sam.
Enough.
It is awesome, and I would say that we do live in an idea, you and I, and it's a good idea. It is a good idea, and we just need to get more Gilbert and Sullivan, and well, we're about to have some Wagnerian music. Good night, Sam.
Good night.
Take care. And good night from New Orleans, and I hope that your reception of the Flying Dutchman is better than mine.